It's been a while since I did a scripted video, so I figured I'd ease myself in with a nice tier list of all the Final Fantasy XIV expansions. I've put a frankly ridiculous amount of time into the game over the last 18 months, close to 1300 hours at this point, and I don't really feel the need to slow down yet. Basically most of my last 2 years have revolved around Final Fantasy XIV, so I think you could say I kind of like it. Before this, I've not been that interested in MMOs in general. I've played a little bit of Lord of the Rings Online, a bit of WoW, and a lot of RuneScape, but otherwise it wasn't my thing. I even tried 14 once before and fell off super early, but this time it just hit right, and now I can't stop. As for what we'll be doing here though, I'm going to go through each expansion, including the base game, in release order. I'll give a little overview on what happens in each expansion before going into what's good and bad about each of them, and why they go in their respective tier. I'm going to wrap all of the patches up in their respective sections too, rather than going through them individually. Also, I'll only be talking about A Realm Reborn forwards, because I have absolutely no experience with 1.0 whatsoever. From what I understand though, 1.0 was quite poorly received and generally not seen as worth playing. After replacing the original director and producer with Naoki Yoshida, a complete reworking of the game started, which eventually resulted in A Realm Reborn. While not exactly a necessary experience anymore, 1.0 did set up the story and lore for Eorzea going forward. Part of me is morbidly curious in experiencing the original at some point, but at least officially that's currently impossible. A Realm Reborn. A Realm Reborn follows the Warrior of Light's journey from their beginnings as mewling kitten on the outskirts of Gridania to becoming the champion of Eorzea that everyone loves. You'll do this with the help of the Scions of the Seventh Dawn, a group dedicated to fighting primals, the summoned gods of the Beastmen, a group who are utterly terrible at the one thing that they do. It's also important to become best friends with the leaders of the major city-states of Eorzea, while in the background Gaius Van bails our plots to take over Eorzea by using a big mech. Finally, you have to deal with the political machinations of everyone's most hated Lalafell, Teleji Adeleji, the formation of the Crystal Braves, which I'm sure will go great, and begin to uncover the plots of the Ascians who seem to have been pulling the strings all along. I'm actually a big fan of A Realm Reborn. I know people think it's the weakest part of the game, and to some extent I agree, but I thoroughly enjoyed my time with it. It does take a while to get going, especially when it comes to cheese. I'd say it only really reaches a good pace in the post 2.0 patches, especially the arc with Moonbreeder. A lot of the best moments are in the post-game patches, honestly, really defining itself as a fantastic game with the Teleji Adeleji Crystal Braves story, resulting in the attempted murder of Nanamo and the Scions being deemed a terrorist organisation. In some ways I think people are more critical of A Realm Reborn mostly because they've had the most time with it. You're just more likely to end up in content from this at any point, be that from the leveling roulette or, of course, from the MSQ roulette, which still only includes the last 2 dungeons and the final trial of the game. I can definitely see why this would get a bit much over the last 9 years, but as someone who's been through it all a lot more recently, I've not really got many negative feelings towards it at all. Heavensward. Following your expulsion from Uldar for treason at the end of A Realm Reborn, the Scions are strewn to the wind, some missing, some presumed dead, and the few remaining members taking refuge in Ishgard. You're taken in as wards of House Forton, the family of your first boyfriend Haurchefant. As the first foreigners to set foot in Ishgard since the Calamity, you're met with distrust and distaste by many members of this hyper-religious city-state. There's more important things than some light racism though, such as the reformation of the Scions of the Seventh Dawn, clearing your name, and maybe solving the small problem of Ishgard's centuries-long crusade against Dravania. Where A Realm Reborn fixed earlier issues and set a foundation for further development, Heavensward was allowed to create its own complete story and thrive doing it. It's possibly the most cohesive individual story of any of the expansions, with each plotline threading back into the overall story perfectly, and with some deeply emotional moments. Isael's sacrifice was powerful, but arguably there is no more resonant moment in the entire game than Haurchefant's death. Points in later expansions come close, but are undercut somewhat by later plot points, where Haurchefant's murder is a moment that lingers even now. This is also the expansion which added my favourite class, the Machinist, and those job rests were a fun time too. The closest thing I've got to a complaint is that the change in voice acting was weird to get used to, but even that was definitely for the best in the end. This was also where they added ether currents, and while I understand from a design perspective why you wouldn't want people to just fly around straight away, the zones are so large that getting through them your first time through can feel a bit of a slog. This is true of every zone from here onward, so it's not a unique issue, and thus I can't judge it too harshly on an individual level. Overall, this expansion is one of the best pieces of video game content I've played, and it's completely free. Heavensward is arguably the bar by which all expansions for any game should be measured. Stormblood. Proven as you are in solving the problems of disparate countries, this time you decide to try two at once, perhaps not to the best results. So far you've always been the biggest, strongest, bestest warrior, but maybe this time you've met your match, and maybe a new boyfriend. You'll journey through Girabania, a desert-filled region which people are very proud of for some reason, to free Alamigo from the Empire's rule, and when that gets too tough you'll run away to the Far East. Some truly loathsome villains control Othard under Garlemald, and it's up to you to find the missing heir and incite a rebellion powerful enough to free Doma and earn a new ally for the Eorzean Alliance, all before returning to Girabania to take part in a musical. Just make sure you don't drink too hard in the party afterwards, you don't want to get any nasty headaches. Stormblood simultaneously has some of my favourite and least favourite moments of any of the expansions. Basically anything that takes place in Girabania besides the musical and Monago bore me to tears. There are some powerful moments, like when Xenos delivers what is essentially your first real loss, but god did I find that section boring. The Far East, on the other hand, is consistently fantastic. Kugane is by far my favourite town in the game, and it's where my apartment now resides because I'm a giant weeb apparently. Yotsuyu is a brilliant character, a truly detestable villain before becoming a friend with a tragic end, and Hien is a leader the rest of the characters can look up to. Everything with Azala too was a great time, from learning about all the different tribes of the steppe through to becoming Kargan in the Nardum. I was also totally surprised by the diving in the Ruby Sea, and while I will say the area is a bit of a chore to get around, it's definitely fun swimming with the fishies. I've been told this was created by two teams simultaneously and you can really feel it. Stormblood really feels like two halves rather than one cohesive whole, and it's a shame because that seems to be what really holds it back. That being said, the parts I like, I love more than many other parts of the game, and if the Girabania section was just a little more interesting, maybe this would be higher on the list. Shadowbringers. You wake up from your terrible hangover with no friends and no idea where you are. It's vaguely familiar, but everything's very purple, and it's oh so very bright. Luckily, a kind man gives you directions to the nearest town and then goes off on his way. I'm sure he's fine. From there, you'll discover just where you are in place, time, dimension, and most importantly of all, emotionally. A rocky hand outstretched to offer guidance in finding your friends, while requesting your help to save a world on the very brink of destruction. You'll team up with the reunited Scions, some new friends, and even some old foes, all while having your understanding of reality upturned in pursuit of becoming the fabled warrior of darkness. You can do it though. It's not like it's the end of days or anything. I definitely enjoyed my time in the first, but by taking place in an entirely separate world, it ends up feeling very distant from the rest of the game. It holds a very important role in the story, with setting the foundations for Endwalker by revealing almost all of the history of the Ascians. The issue though is that it also left me feeling like we'd almost abandoned Eorzea while it was going through a crisis, only for that crisis to get resolved largely off-screen. I did still like a lot of Shadowbringers, with some great characters being introduced like Feo Ul, but even then, I don't ever really feel the need to go see them again. One thing I can't fault is the music, which I thought was fantastic throughout, and especially in the Rak'tika Greatwood. This was the first time I explicitly noticed the difference in music between expansions. Each clearly has its own themes, but this one feels explicitly other to reinforce taking place in an altogether different place. The whole world feels sufficiently different, while still retaining many of the similarities with the source we know. I almost wish I liked it more in some ways. I know people are going to think I've put this kind of low, but I just prefer the other expansions a lot more. Endwalker. It's the end of days. Your ex is willing to sacrifice the world for another night with you, and his new boy toy is more than happy to oblige. Giant mind control towers have appeared all over the world, and you're one of the few people who can resist them. Garlemald has collapsed, and they aren't exactly happy to receive help from all the countries they've been invading for the last 20 years. That being said, they don't have much of a choice, and you need to find out exactly what's going on in their capital city. The Sharlians would be a big help if you could convince them to join you, but they're too interested in running a zoo. Maybe you could find some help from your past adventures. Maybe not though. Maybe it'd be better to look to the skies. The final part of this saga, a journey from Eorzea to the end of the universe and even further, in a fight to show a depressed god just how much your friendships mean to you. Endwalker is great, close to being the greatest, but just doesn't quite make it to the heights of Heavensward. Honestly, it's incredibly close, but Heavensward just beats it out for some of the reasons I've mentioned earlier. There are some incredibly emotional moments in this expansion, but a lot of them are undercut in one way or another. There are a number of actual character deaths which hit hard, but most of them don't stick. The entire group of the Scions sacrifice themselves at the end of the game in moments which, at the time, hit harder than probably any other moment in the game, to the point where I was legitimately upset in a way I hadn't been since Haurchefant's death. The issue here is that you just kind of bring them all back again after beating the boss. I get it, but I honestly think it was the wrong choice. To me, it left their sacrifice, and thus much of Ultima Thule, feeling quite hollow. The only deaths which result in actual death are for characters you don't spend much time with, and who you largely have an antagonistic relationship towards. The depths of despair is a huge theme to Endwalker, but there was no one moment where I truly felt like I was in any danger. I'll also say I'm quite sad we'll never get to see Garlemald in its complete form. I get why it's like this, but I'd imagined an almost futuristic city in my head. Think Magitech skyscrapers and hovercars, that sort of thing, and we'll never see that now. It's not without its great parts though. I've complained a lot about how the story doesn't follow through with its sadness, but in other ways I really liked it. There are many callbacks and references to things from earlier expansions, like meeting Moonbreeder's parents or finding Tataru's lost carbuncle. Travelling through all the new and old areas too, ridding the world of blasphemies, felt like a great way to spend time with characters I hadn't seen for a long while. Overall, I got what I wanted from it, and it's a great way to end the saga, but it just feels a little bit lacking in some areas which holds it back from the top space. I've put a frankly ridiculous amount of time into the game over the last 18 months, and the majority of that, including every quest I've completed so far, has been live on my Twitch. All of that is also available right now on my gameplay channel if you want to check all that out. I've also got mini reviews for each expansion on my TikTok and Shorts channels as well, so you could say I've put out a lot of Final Fantasy content recently. It's kind of strange, honestly. Before 14, the only Final Fantasy games I'd really played were 15, the 7 remake, and My Life as a King. I'm more interested now in going back to see what the other games were like, and I'm excited to play 16 when that comes out. More than anything though, I'm just excited to see where 14 goes from here. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my patrons, Justin Wood, Hobbs, Koopy Vegeta and Gunrunner. You can join my patrons at patreon.com/HoldenGatsby, follow me on Twitter at HoldenGatsby, and follow my Twitch at twitch.tv/HoldenGatsby. Don't forget to subscribe to both of my channels. Thanks for sticking around. Bye.